Every empire he faced fought him. Armies gathered, cities resisted, kings prepared for war. That was the pattern. That was the expectation. But then he entered Egypt, and something changed. No massive battle, no desperate defense, no final stand. Instead, the gates opened. The land that had once been ruled by the powerful Darius III did something no empire had done before. It didn't resist. It accepted him, for a man who had built his legend through conquest and destruction. This was something entirely different, because how do you conquer a land that doesn't fight back? And more importantly, what happens to a conqueror when he is no longer resisted? Because in Egypt, Alexander did not just win, he changed. To understand why Egypt did not fight, you have to look at what it had already endured. For years, Egypt had been under the control of the Persian Empire. Ruled from afar by kings like Darius III, it was treated not as a partner, but as a possession. And that distinction mattered, because Egypt was not just territory. It was one of the oldest civilizations in the world, built on identity, religion, and tradition that stretched back thousands of years. Its rulers were not just kings. They were pharaohs, figures tied to divine authority, guardians of balance between the human and the sacred. Persian rule disrupted that system. Foreign control weakened local traditions. Authority felt distant. And over time, resentment grew. This is where strategy becomes psychological, because when a population loses trust in its current ruler, it begins to look for an alternative. And when that alternative arrives at the right moment, that it is not seen as an enemy. It is seen as an answer. By the time Alexander approached Egypt, Persian control was already collapsing across the region. Their power was breaking, their authority fading. So when he entered, he was not facing a united, loyal province. He was stepping into a land already prepared for change. When Alexander crossed into Egypt, something remarkable happened. There was no major battle waiting for him. No army assembled at the borders. No desperate attempt to push him back. Instead, cities opened their gates. Local leaders surrendered. Control shifted, not through violence, but through acceptance. This was not weakness. It was calculation. Because the people of Egypt were not choosing defeat. They were choosing a different ruler. And Alexander understood this immediately. He did not enter as a destroyer. He entered as a liberator. He respected local customs, avoided unnecessary destruction, and positioned himself as the one who would restore what had been lost under Persian rule. This changed everything. Because power gained through fear is unstable. It must constantly be defended. But power granted through acceptance, that it sustains itself. Egypt did not see Alexander as an outsider imposing control. They saw him as someone who could belong. And in that moment, he achieved something greater than conquest. He achieved legitimacy. Acceptance gave Alexander control, but control alone was not enough. He needed authority that would last. So he made a decision that would define his rule in Egypt. He embraced their system. Alexander allowed himself to be crowned pharaoh, not as a foreign ruler standing above the culture, but as a king within it. And in Egypt, that meant something very specific. A pharaoh was not just a political leader. He was a sacred figure, a bridge between gods and people, a symbol of order, balance, and divine connection. By stepping into this role, Alexander was doing more than ruling Egypt. He was transforming how he was seen. This was not force. This was integration. He did not replace their beliefs. He became part of them. From a strategic perspective, this is one of the most powerful forms of control. Because people resist what feels imposed, but they accept what feels familiar. Alexander did not try to change Egypt. He aligned himself with it. And in doing so, he secured something no army could guarantee: loyalty without resistance. Then came the moment that changed everything. Alexander traveled deep into the desert, far from cities, far from armies, to a place known as the Siwa Oasis. There stood the temple of Amun and its oracle. This was not a military move. It was something else entirely. Because in the ancient world, oracles held power beyond religion. They shaped perception. They defined legitimacy. They influenced how rulers were seen, not just by their people, but by history itself. When Alexander arrived, what happened inside that temple remains uncertain. The exact words were never fully recorded. But the outcome is clear. He left with a new identity, a new belief that he was not just a king, but the son of a god. Whether this was declared openly or understood quietly, that it changed him. And more importantly, he accepted it. From that moment on, Alexander began to see himself differently, not just as a conqueror, not just as a ruler, but as something greater, and this shift would shape every decision that followed. Because a king leads an army, but a god-king believes he cannot be stopped. Alexander did not leave Egypt unchanged. He built something that would outlast him. Along the Mediterranean coast, he founded a city, Alexandria. This was not just another settlement. It was a statement, a strategic center position for trade, culture, and power, a place where Greek and Egyptian worlds would meet, where ideas would spread, where influence would grow long after his campaigns ended. This decision revealed something important. Alexander was no longer focused only on winning battles. He was thinking about legacy, about permanence, about shaping the future, not just controlling the present. And at the same time, something within him had shifted. He was no longer just moving from one conquest to another. He was building an identity that combined cultures, beliefs, and power into something new. After Egypt, Alexander was no longer simply conquering lands. He was constructing a world. Egypt did not challenge Alexander. It transformed him. In a land where no army stood against him, he discovered something more powerful than victory. He discovered belief. And from that moment forward, every battle he fought carried a different weight. Not just ambition, but destiny. Because once a man begins to see himself as something more than human, there are no limits left to stop him. Subscribe for more cinematic war intelligence, where strategy, power, and history come alive.